So I'm going to just hit record on this particular one right now because I'm doing the lectures now in two parts. To keep it a little more simple, we're going to get the theory part and we're going to separate it from the state test part. So one of the things that we want to do is to get you ready to pass all those EX questions, right? And so we're going to talk about some of that today, but we're also going to give you some stuff today that will help you with your paper. Because one of the topics, of course, is climate change. And you guys all know what's going on in Texas right now, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this up. These lectures down here on the origins of law, I'm going to make those little mini lessons, and we'll have a study guide just for that, maybe in a couple of weeks. We'll only spend about half the period on this. We'll spend the other half of the period getting you ready for your research paper, getting you ready for your EX questions. So we're going to have a break. So I'm taping this portion for the students at home for the state test and for their research paper. And then I'll take the second half of the lecture next hour and post that down here. So none of them will be longer than 25 minutes at the most. Okay. So that way you don't have to go through an entire lecture where we're talking about the research paper and just find the information for your study guide. We're going to keep all of that information together so that you don't have to open a lot of things and that kind of stuff. Going to make it easier. Okay, so don't worry about anything here. We're going to give you review this lecture here. I'm going to delete this one. In fact, we're not even going to use it. I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to review it really quickly with you, and then just add about 20 minutes a day until we get through. So in about 2-3 weeks, we'll have a study guide for the origins of laws. Very important college content that the university wants us to teach. But we'll have up here helps with your paper. And that we'll actually probably post these down here too, because we've got all these links down here to help you get your research started. These lectures will go into that. Okay, make sense? All right, I hope so. Anyway, we're trying to make it a little easier to follow so you don't have to work quite so hard. All right, well, let's go and talk now about the Biden administration and the transition. One poll gave him 66% approval in how he's handling the transition from one government to another. 62 in another poll overall approval rating. Some have them a little lower. There's lots of different polling companies, but the number one issue, of course, is the vaccine. And this is the one I'm committed to give you the information. I'm giving you the data, right? I'm giving you this one. You can just go through what I've said and you can say, these are the facts, right? Okay, so here's one as of a couple days ago. The Biden administration with the states has ironed out the distribution problems pretty much. We've got federal troops in one case, soldiers doing it. We got FEMA putting up 100 sites. We opened one in Shopko here, just in south of the county, the old Shopko. Things are ready. The problem is we don't have enough vaccine now. Where before it was a distribution problem, now it's a supply problem. And you have to understand, we have to buy this from multinational corporations. We don't have an agency in our government that makes this. They help with the science, they help with the technology, but then we got to buy it, and it's expensive. Has it bought? US taxpayer dollars. We pay for it. We need everybody vaccinated or we all get sick. It's a very social thing here. My health depends on your health, and your health depends on your neighbor's health. So we need to make the vaccine available for everybody, right? But we're a long ways off. When Biden did a town hall last night, in that town hall, he admitted that when he got into the presidency and they found out there were only 50 million doses in the pipeline, once they started to vaccinate people in numbers, they were running out fast. They had to make some quick decisions there. And they went out and made sure they purchased and put in the pipeline now, it's 600 million doses. He's added 550 million doses to the pipeline. We buy it from Pfizer. Moderna's upped its production. We have to compete against other countries too for this. You have 190 countries in the world are all begging for vaccine. So it's a great business opportunity for these companies that can produce the vaccine. But we're in a race against time too, because in the United States, we have 7 variations of this. It's not just the one from Africa. It's not just the one from Brazil. It's not just the one from England. It's 7 that have mutated here in our own country. So we got to get this first round of vaccination. And no sooner do we do that, and the goal is like midsummer, no sooner do we do that, then we'll all probably need a booster in the fall. That has to be manufactured too. It's going to be expensive. And no one person, no healthcare system, no people can't afford it. We have to do it together through our federal government, which is important then for Biden to get his $1.9 trillion program through Congress, because we've got to amp up the resources for this to get schools back online and whatever. But we're making progress. So far, about 1.1 million people a day. Then we're up to, it looks like we could get to 3 million by the end of March, April, 3.8, 4.4. That's still not good enough, but it's dictated by the supply. And Biden was able to secure enough vaccine to increase to from 11 million per week for the states. In other words, it all comes into the federal government. Look, here's the thing. States can't all compete for this on their own. The state of Utah, couldn't afford it. And even if we could, 50 states and 200 countries all competing with each other to buy this? No, we buy it as a country and distribute it to the states. So the states handle distribution. Some are doing it differently than others. Nearly everybody's doing 70 and up first, right? But 22 states are vaccinating teachers because they want to get schools open to normal next year. 28 states aren't. And by the way, 92% of our students live in red zones. So this is really kind of an interesting dilemma, but nonetheless, they increased the pace per week from 11 to 13.5 million, which is a significant increase. All right. So that's the good news, is that it's been increased, and they'll increase it more and more and more as they get supply available. Now, the American Rescue Plan is a lot about this word here called infrastructure. So when you're talking about the economy and you're doing that part of your research paper, economy is really complicated. And the American infrastructure is not very good. We are literally heading toward third world status here. We have a fourth world rail system. It's horrible. We have our roads, so many need repair. We just don't have the infrastructure we need. And it's roads, it's airports, it's ports, it's railways, it's energy, it's utilities, it's education, it's healthcare, it's social, it's internet access to broadband in areas where they don't have it. That's called infrastructure. And what we're witnessing right now in Texas is an infrastructure failure. I want to say this, listen carefully. When government's working well, we just go about our lives and live life as normal, and we're not preoccupied with a lot of things. Utah, I think, has done a great job with its coronavirus response. We have confidence in our governor, in our leaders, and whatever. And there's not a controversy a day about they should be doing this and that. We're sitting there, okay, it's working, it's getting better. Yes, it needs to improve more. But good government is boring. Listen carefully. Listen very carefully. I got people taking notes, playing on their phones. Listen carefully. Good government is boring because it gets things done and you don't have to worry about it. It's not a controversy every minute. Bad government means crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. So we want stable, calm government, and Texas, they messed up. Texas is the only state that runs its own power grid. Its power grid is independent because they wanted it that way, because if they joined the rest of the country, because there's a Western power grid and an Eastern power grid, right? We're in this one. And we tie everything together. You have to follow certain federal regulations. And we also have to work with Canada because we're part of their system too. So if you look at this is the massive Eastern power grid. Here's the Western power grid. Texas, they're the energy capital of the world. They got more oil, they got more resources than anybody else. So they don't need the rest of the country. They can do it themselves. Well, guess what? They underfunded the infrastructure. They got hit by one storm that anybody else living in here would have just said, oh yeah, that's just Thursday. But down here, it has literally knocked out power to millions of people, led to 19 deaths already. And it was a failure of government, a failure of the Texas government to invest in the infrastructure. For example, they produce about 20% of their power with renewables. When they bought their windmills, they didn't buy the kind you have to buy up here that have heating elements in the blades. So the blades, when they get to cold and icy storms, don't ice up. So they can keep spinning and producing electricity. You have to design them to be warm. They didn't buy those. We don't need those. We'll buy the cheaper ones. They're paying the price now. But most of their energy is provided by coal or natural gas, and their natural gas systems froze up. They couldn't pump the gas to the refineries in order to get the electricity out. They literally did not prepare. So let's go ahead and let's look at Texas, and let's look at a failure of the Texas energy grid that is causing a lot of trouble. Here we go.
Tonight, the new winter storm bearing down on millions who are still without power. 110 million Americans on alert from Texas up through New England. Another blast of snow, ice, and brutal cold on the heels of the storm that left dozens dead. Over 3 million homes powerless in Texas. The desperate struggle, families cooking in the freezing cold, some going to dangerous extremes to stay warm. Rolling blackouts with seemingly no end in sight. What's to blame for the massive failure? Also, the extreme weather causing a major disruption in COVID vaccinations and shipments. Sites shut down nationwide, thousands of appointments canceled. And after you're vaccinated, can you still spread the virus? We'll tell you what Dr. Fauci is saying. President Biden's new timeline when he now says every American can get the vaccine. And our exclusive with Vice President Kamala Harris. Does she agree with the CDC's plan for reopening schools and what she says about vaccinating teachers? Our series, Kids Under Pressure, Teens Warning Homework, has become a nightmare of the pandemic. One school working to change all that. And Scouts Honor, 17 young women making history and inspiring America.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome. These are desperate hours for millions in Texas, still left in the cold and dark this evening from a failing power grid. Their misery compounded by sub-freezing temperatures and only vague assurances of when the lights may come back on for good. The frantic search for warmth putting some families at deadly risk from carbon monoxide poisoning as others find their water supplies frozen. And the extreme weather has been unrelenting. Another storm on the march, bringing ice and snow across more than a dozen states. All this hitting vaccine shipments hard. We're going to talk about that and what happens to all those now canceled appointments. A lot to cover this evening. Let's begin in Dallas with Morgan Chesky.
Tonight in Texas, frustrations rising in a frigid crisis.
We need our power out here.
My apartment is under 40 degrees.
It's freezing. It's a blackout, no electricity.
More than 3 million homes in the dark from a brutal cold, crippling the state's power grid.
Every source of power that the state of Texas has been compromised.
Today, Texas Governor Greg Abbott unable to say when the lights are coming back on. Rolling blackouts forcing countless families to fend for themselves. Minority communities hit especially hard.
When you hear power may not be fully restored for days, how's that hit you?
Oh, it's like a brick.
In Fort Worth, the Adelas piling their 7 kids into a church van turned shelter.
This is not okay.
Cooking in sub-freezing temps alongside cold and tired neighbors.
Which is then the best? Trying to survive.
In Houston, survival efforts turning deadly. More than 300 carbon monoxide cases flooding hospitals.
We are overwhelmed with the number of patients, and that does make us have to go into kind of a mass casualty operation.
People misusing cars, generators, and fire pits, trying desperately to stay warm. For others, a water nightmare. Pipes bursting or freezing, forcing some to go to extremes.
We're going to continue to try to collect snow since we haven't had water.
First responders working nonstop. Police body cam capturing a dog trapped on an ice-covered pond. Rescued and pulled to shore by officers just in time. The cold even hitting the coast, where volunteers saved hundreds of sea turtles, nearly frozen, and like so many others, left waiting to warm up.
We are ready for hurricanes here, but we were not ready for this.
A frightening realization with another freeze coming.
And tonight, the White House promising help is on the way, pledging generators and the much-needed diesel to run them to keep Texas hospitals and other vital facilities open till this cold snap clears.
Remember we talked to you about federalism. We talked about the partnerships, right? The state governor has got to declare a state of emergency and request help from Biden. That's the way the laws are written. Biden can declare then a state of emergency and can release special funds that have been set aside to help out, including sending generators for hospitals and critical infrastructure so that, you know, we can alleviate some of the suffering down there. This is how it works, federalism, right? Texas decided to go it alone. They decided to play by their own rules. Now they're paying the price for it because you've got to keep up with the technology.
Lester, folks going through a lot. Morgan, thank you. If you'd like to help those in need, you'll find the information on our NBC Nightly News Facebook page. Well, the pressing question in all this, just why was Texas so unprepared for the power struggle that had plunged so many into darkness and cold? Gabe Gutierrez in Houston now with more.
Tonight, the so-called energy capital of the world is mostly powerless. Who dropped the ball here?
Well, I think it's the state. Sadly, the state didn't prepare for the worst-case scenario, and now we're paying the price.
Texas is the only state with its own power grid, which critics say allows it to bypass federal regulations for cold weather safeguards. The governor is calling for an investigation of ERCOT, the nonprofit that operates the grid. How could you not see this coming?
Well, ERCOT saw the storm coming. The issue that happened on Sunday is as the storm blew in, it also did damage to the supply side. And that knocked us enough out of balance that we had to take on these outages.
Some state leaders have blamed the outages on a failure of green energy, but wind and solar only make up 21% of the state's power. Natural gas makes up half. And this week, there wasn't enough supply for the demand caused by the extreme temperatures.
The power system, I think it's safe to say at this point, was not prepared for climate change.
El Paso, on the far west side of the state, is on a different electrical system, which is running smoothly, leaving Houston residents like Terry Gallick, who's been without power for 3 days, wondering what went so wrong.
Everybody knew ahead of time that the storm was coming. Why are we in this position?
More gas stations are closing here, and some people are lining up for propane. They have no firm answer on when to expect their power back. Lester?
All right, Gabe, thank you. And there's another blast of dangerous winter weather threatening several states tonight.
Okay, we'll pause right there. You got the story in Texas, and see, that's when there is a failure in government. They failed. Not just to prepare for this one storm, but they didn't prepare for inevitable changes in their climate. And one of your essays, of course, is on climate change. Let's kind of take a quick look at some of this stuff right here. Here's the actual energy grid and how they're linked together. We basically overproduce in Utah, and we ship a lot of electricity to other states. A lot of independent companies are part of this. You know, it's a little private businesses are doing most of this work, but they're linked together and they have to follow a certain set of rules so they can ship electricity all over to everybody when they need it. When California is running low, we're able to help out. And so this is the power grid here. This is the system. And in Texas, they just decided in this area to go their own way. And it's not big enough. Not even Texas is big enough. So yeah, now our infrastructure overall is lousy when it comes to our electrical grid. We all know that. Why do we still have power lines that haven't been dug underground? If you got power lines above ground, an ice storm is going to bring some of them down and you're going to lose power to tens of thousands of people. There's just so much that we need to do, and it takes money to do it. And government's the only one that can come up with that money because these individual companies can't make enough profit on that. They can produce it, but they can't build the massive infrastructure. So that's part of the plan, is putting people to work, building this massive infrastructure. What's causing this thing? Well, here's a theory. The Gulf Stream is weakening. And also El Nino, what's happening in the Pacific is causing this. If this Gulf Stream collapses and then just goes like this instead of up into Western Europe's in real trouble. It's going to get really cold up there. Or maybe not, who knows? But what it seems to be doing is creating what we call a lazy jet stream. The jet stream normally goes like this. It's really tight and it's more linear. Not linear, it always has dips in it, but these troughs are getting bigger. And these troughs are prevented from happening by a strong Gulf Stream and a strong warm area in the Pacific. And so these cold airs, when they plummet, there's less high pressure to keep them out. And as a result, you get these big dips. And that's why it can get really cold in Texas all of a sudden. So it is climate change. You know, it's not, the earth is warming, yes, but the consequences of that is that it can get really cold at times too, because of the upper atmosphere and the way it works. All right, well, that should give you some food for thought for your research paper in terms of climate change. And hopefully, you know, that'll be enough to get you started. Remember, there's Biden's speech I posted online for you on this. And so I'm just going to stop the share here real fast and pause.